Hello and welcome everybody to the IndieLive.radio office. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
Yep.
You're good?
Yes.
I'm here with Marlene from Pensioners for Indy. She's my co-host this morning, does a great job. We'll chuff with that.
Right.
And I've got Sue Parsons from Boston, USA.
Hey, Kevin.
Sue, I seen your tweets, right? And I thought, I need to talk to this person. And,
Knew they'd get me into trouble.
well, there you go. That's one of the issues. But I just thought it'd be really good to have a chat with you because it'd be very interesting. I could see that you're a political activist in the US, refugees, etc. And I thought it'd be really interesting to chat with you. So that's why I wanted to pull you in.
Well, thank you.
And here you are, all the way.
I'm thrilled.
It's fantastic. So maybe, for those who don't really know what you do or why you're here in Scotland, maybe could give us a little overview.
Absolutely. I've lost track. This may be my 7th trip to Scotland over the past 45 years.
Wow.
I started off in 1972 in September. I decided to do what we called in the US a junior year abroad, a third year of university. And I wasn't sure what country to go to. Couldn't speak French very well. England seemed a little too similar to the US in my naive thinking. So I thought, well, what about Scotland? Why don't I learn about that small country? Little did I know the impact that Scotland would have on my life.
Yeah.
When I came in 72, the Vietnam War was in full force.
Wow.
Yeah. And Scots came up to me, whether it was on the bus, in the pub, in the classroom, and wanted to know about why and how America was involved in Vietnam. And the difference in talking about this here compared to the US was so marked. People here seriously wanted to know, and initially without much judgment. They really wanted to know where I stood, tried to understand that, and then if they differed, they would get into that. But the political discussions here, and this I can sort of bear out over my 45 years experience, are quite different from what I've experienced in the US. I mean, right now in the US, you know how challenging political discussion is. Families feel like they can't discuss their differences. So to have a place where back in the 70s, that was very comfortable, and a university that I think was really finding its political footing at the time. Now, believe it or not, Gordon Brown was the president at Edinburgh the year I was there.
He was the rector.
The rector.
He was the rector. He was the first rector who was also a student.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, sorry for interrupting you there, Sue, but
No.
I remember that clearly because I voted for him.
Yeah.
Is
I
that
was
right?
an undergrad. Yeah,
Wow.
that was the first time I voted for Gordon
Yeah.
Brown. I voted subsequently quite a few times. Stop that now, but yeah. So he'd been voted in as the student rector for Edinburgh.
And he was good friends of a number of my friends. There was Bill Campbell, who was head of the Student Publications Board. There was Billy Kay, just a whole retinue of people that I was
Wow.
getting to know.
Yeah.
So there was that aspect of it. I think I didn't quite realize how ready I was to be engaged politically and to learn and to be able to do it in a more open way with people. So that was sort of
Sounds
my
great,
first
yeah.
introduction. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And I also got to take a Scottish history course
Yeah.
and sit in on classes at the School of Scottish Studies and do things like run into Hamish Henderson at Sandy Bell's. So, and hear Robert Garriock read his poetry. I mean, hear Hamish. No, oh my God, your major poet of the 20th century, Hugh McDermott.
Hugh McDermott.
Hear him read when he was, I think, in his 80s.
Yeah, he would be elderly.
Yeah.
Then. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a combination of the kind of on-the-spot learning and the challenges for me. And of course, another challenge for an American is language. Scots
How
is...
did you get on with that?
Oh, it's its own language
Yeah.
with its own, developed history, its own vocabulary. Well, even today, in the cab, I still don't do well with Glaswegian Scots.
It can be tricky, that's for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't worry about that.
I wish I did better.
So do you think you picked up a wee bit of Scots accent then, you Ken?
Well, I mean,
She said in her now not very good Fife accent, but it is where I grew up.
Well, when I came home, I had that lovely lyrical cadence that you Scots speak with.
Yeah, great.
And I think I picked that up pretty quickly when I'm here. I also noticed that there are different Americanisms that I tend to try to drop so that people will understand me better. Or maybe so I'll be more accepted and not looked at as your typical American tourist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I open my mouth, people say, "Oh, you're American." It's like, "Oh, I haven't lost it."
So,
But I think that's a good example of, Scotland. Yeah, you said earlier, right, we're a small country, we're a small nation, and in Edinburgh is a relatively small city, and it's also easy to come across people. It's easy to kind of find yourself in the company that, in a larger country or even down in England, you probably wouldn't actually, be part of. So it's one of the things that makes it really attractive.
That's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, I didn't meet Nicola Sturgeon this trip, or some of the other members of Parliament who I would love to meet, who I
and you
greatly
definitely
admire.
wouldn't have met her in 1972.
No.
definitely not. So was there much talk then about Scottish independence? I mean, 72?
Boy, that's such a good question.
It would have been quite under the radar then, I would imagine.
I would say it was and it wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, the Scottish students definitely clearly made the point that there was a great distinction between the English and the Scots.
Yeah.
And I would say they stressed that vociferously. I wouldn't say there was a lot of talk about having an independent referendum, and probably not much talk that I recall about the Scottish Nationalist Party.
Yeah.
But absolutely the people who I tended to gravitate to, and it might have just been luck, the first people I met, the first week or two here, were definitely the ones who were really devoted to acknowledging and recognizing how Scotland is its own nation. And the difference I think for a lot of them as students at the university, they were probably kind of discovering and validating a lot about, your history, your literature, politics.
Yeah. I think. What course were you doing?
At home we would just call it a general liberal arts course.
Yeah,
so English literature.
So you would be in contact with more of the students in the arts department.
Yes.
I was in the science faculty, and I don't remember any of us being involved in politics whatsoever. But actually, 1972. I was just checking there to make sure I got it right. That was when Ted Heath was Prime Minister. So we'd gone from late 60s, that was Wilson, that was the Labour government. Ted Heath got in with the Conservatives, and he was only in for four years till we got back to a sort of a Labour government again. So it was, it was back to having Conservatives in Westminster.
And people could have been responding off of that as well.
Yeah. Because we probably hadn't voted for them in Scotland. Yeah.
What I remember is a great difference for me as a student, sort of in student life, was that university students had these, to me, wonderful grants, that you had government-funded education. And I'll never forget, a number of my friends, by the end of whatever that grant period check was meant to last, they'd be eating a lot of baked potatoes the last week or so.
That's right. I mean, I was the last year that got grants. That was the last year. That'd been 92. That's when they stopped all the grants and you had to start paying and all that.
Yeah, to get a loan, student loan.
Yeah.
I mean, I was on, as an undergraduate then, I mean, you could live off the student grant.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't high lifestyle, but you could live off it. Pay rent and live off it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now students do what they do in the US? You take out grants to fund your university education?
Not quite that.
No.
In Scotland, the university fees are paid for by Scottish Government.
Oh, good.
And they're currently run at about 9,000 a year, so that's a considerable, over a 3 or 4 year course, that's, £36,000 outlay that Scots students don't have to pay, but they still have to come up with their living expenses. So they still have to come up with rent, food, what have you. And then there's a system of student loans that you can take out, which you then have to pay back after you've graduated, but only once you reach a certain threshold income. So
That's good. Yeah, at home, students have to pay them back, some of them immediately, and others, they have a 6-month grace period, but it's not very much. And the interest starts accruing.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think that stops a lot of people taking up university education in the US?
I actually don't think it does. I think that when you're 17 years old, most people have no conception of what it means to carry a $40,000 to $120,000 loan. I think they're just so delighted that they see this 4-year course of study in front of them and a career at the end of it. And of course, as you probably know, with the economic downturn, so many of our university students have been unemployed or very much underemployed and are despairing about the extent of what, And we have a whole unfortunate system also of private colleges that are more kind of technical schools that we're trying to regulate. For instance, Elizabeth Warren, our senator from Massachusetts, is trying to regulate because those charge even higher fees and higher interest, and they sell students a bill of goods and sometimes even then go out of business partway through their curriculum, and they're left without a degree, without a job, owing tens of thousands of dollars.
Wasn't there a certain Trump University?
Trump. What was that about?
I mean, I sort of thought at the time, well, if you were daft enough to sign up for it, but, actually still, people could, as you say, people could be left in very bad circumstances.
Yeah.
So whatever happened to that thing with Trump? That it was a university or something that he set up, and it get discredited or something?
The people who ran it disbanded it. I know little about it, actually. I do know that there were all kinds of lawsuits from the students. But, the impact of that and these other private universities is still being felt because under the Republicans, the Democrats have not been able to issue regulations or any rules or laws to stop what's happening.
Down in England, it's different for the grants, isn't it? They've got to pay.
Well, they have to pay fees. So as well as your living expenses, they have to pay the university fees, which are mostly about £9,000 a year.
Wow.
So if you've been to university in England, then you come out with a debt of at least, well, most of their courses are 3 years, so 27,000, and whatever debt you've run up, just surviving and paying for your lunch and your rent and what have you.
Yeah. So
and that came in, and I think because my daughter just escaped that, so I must have come in about 2003, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we've got a separate education system up here, which we control. So that saves us from a lot of the pain that they get down south.
Yeah.
Thankfully, so we can still have a decent education system without getting into all that.
I mean, like you were saying, Scottish education systems always, historically always been different from what developed in the rest of the United Kingdom, the rest of Great Britain. So if we didn't have the Holyrood and education wasn't devolved, we would be in the same situation as it. Actually, it wouldn't have been possible not to have devolved education, given that there's such differences in the what the kids learn at school, the exams they take, the entrance qualifications are all different.
I think these are the kinds of things that Americans don't understand nor appreciate. That Scotland has a different education system, in some ways, medical system,
that's right.
Law system.
And
so
thankfully for that, or we might not be having an independence referendum if we didn't have that in place. For the get-go. Does it even register Scotland in the USA? I mean, we're such a tiny.
Of course it does, because so many Americans have Scottish roots. And it's quite phenomenal how what kind of pride that carries for people, and how many generations that lasts for. And for instance, where I live in Boston, there's a huge Celtic music scene. Of course, it's a huge Irish population,
Yeah.
from the
Yeah,
1800s on
yeah.
to the 1980s, actually, with a lot of immigrants. But when it comes to the music, people love not everyone, obviously, but people, as I do, love Scottish traditional music and a whole
Yeah.
range of Celtic music. And there's been so many new, younger musicians who have continued that and come across to perform. And we have a lot of young Americans who studied fiddle and harp and
Gaelic?
accordion and, not so much Scottish Gaelic. Although we do have some singers and performers, it's more the other Scots music. So it's kind of all encompassing.
Yeah.
So there's that.
There's that.
But there's also this is really interesting. America does have this support for sort of the downtrodden little guy, believe it or not. I can't believe I'm saying that in 2019. But it is still there.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know whether it's from the Scots or from American Scots, but there's sort of a knowledge of some of the inventors and the political figures who were Scots, either born here or, were not more than a generation or two removed. So there's that. But you're right, Kevin. Americans do not have a clear sense, as I said, of the difference between, I don't think Americans understand what the UK and Great Britain really is and means, and sort of what's the political differences, and they certainly don't understand what happens in Westminster. And we get next to no news, whether it's radio, television, print, about Scottish independence, about the way that the Scottish MPs have been treated in Westminster over the past year and a half. For instance, with Brexit, there was one article and one TV spot sometime in the last 6 months. And oh my God, Scotland was finally acknowledged, but it was so superficial.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't leave Americans with a way to understand in order to express an opinion and support.
Yeah.
And that may not mean much here, because it's more the support and the strength of the people here and what you all do about it, rather than having the external across the Atlantic support.
Is Brexit big news at all?
Oh, yes. Big news. I think in a number of ways. Again, because U.S. feels like it has this historic connection with Britain. But of course, maybe a lot of people see that as England. I'm not really sure.
I think it tends
Well, they
to
use the terms, as if they're
Interchange.
equivalents.
Yeah. And
There you
then
go.
I wonder if it's somewhat reassuring that you have someone like a Boris Johnson while we have a Donald Trump. And it's almost like, it's happening there too.
Unfortunately, that's the case, as we'll probably find out tomorrow.
be.
I know. When your fellow countrymen were voting in Mr. Trump, I know Hillary Clinton had baggage and everything, but she was incredibly experienced. She was intelligent. She has a history of social action.
She does.
She's done a lot, and before her husband became involved in politics, she's done a lot. And when your countrymen were voting him in, I was having conversations like, my God, what's happened in America? How could they possibly be voting for this guy? Look at him, he's shameless, and obviously doesn't bother about telling the truth. And now, I have to say, rather, shamefacedly, that the same thing seems to be about to happen in, at least in the Conservative Party, when they voted in Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they haven't, but it certainly looks like they have.
Yeah. Well,
He's more intelligent. He can ask questions in Latin.
yeah.
He can string sentences together, but he's pretty, shameless when it comes to telling the truth, being accurate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the thing is, for Scotland, where do we sit in all this? And it's even at the moment, there's Conservatives resigning and talking about resigning because they don't want a no-deal Brexit. But Brexit will happen in one form or the other, and the big thing for, as a Scottish independence supporter, like, do we get another referendum, or which way we're going? It's so unclear what's going to happen.
So that's where I wanted to come over at this time.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah.
I actually thought, how do I express this? I have to jump back 7 weeks just before I left and what I was thinking after traveling around the country. Literally, I've been up to the Orkneys and to the Northwest, and then, Edinburgh and here and a few other places in between. And I have to say, similar to in the U.S., people are really tired of it all. I can't tell you how many people I've run across that almost just want to not have to deal with it for a while. Just have Brexit be over. It's really fascinating to me. Now, not the Scots who I've met and who I know, the ones I know better, who are in favor of independence. They're sort of, I think, able to sit and hold onto this and know that as bad as it gets, you all have steps you can take. You have an option. You have a way. You can organize yourselves to come up with something far better. But there's a lot of people who perhaps haven't been as politically involved, who are just exhausted by it all and would like to avoid all the disagreement, or who are angry or disillusioned. And I didn't expect to find as much of that. I mean, that I experience and hear at home, and I suffer from it myself, and it can make it very hard to continue in one's political activism. I mean, that's, in a way, that's also why I'm here.
Yeah.
I want it to be infused with more hopeful energy.
Well, we're definitely hopeful.
That's a lovely thing to say, isn't it?
We're definitely hopeful, aren't we?
Come to Scotland for hopeful energy.
Yes.
I mean, that's hey, we found a slogan here.
I think, I've heard that before. There's a lot of people starting to, they're getting a bit, just get on with it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? That has the opposite effect on me.
Good.
I'm very enthused.
Good.
Right? And it's quite,
Yeah.
distressing.
Yeah.
When you get someone like, I'm really sick and tired of all this politics. Boo-hoo. Sorry. But I'm like, well, we've got all this poverty issues here, and Brexit's going to make it worse. I find it hard to feel much sympathy for that's how it is. Sorry.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I know what you mean with that. But I kind of, I do understand it. I do understand that a certain weariness. I mean, 3 years getting on now, and nothing's, Westminster's paralysed. Almost nothing's gone through Westminster in way of normal kind of legislation and bills and things. And then especially this year, from the beginning of the year, right, we're out in March. Oh, no, we're not. Oh, we need to have another vote. I'll bring my deal back. I've got a deal. Sorry, that's me being Mrs. May. I can sort of sympathise with people's weariness, and I do think I think it is something that the independence movement have to take on board. Yeah. Because if we obviously want to have another an independence referendum, but there needs to be out of this. We're in this gap, this hiatus. We need to get out of it.
Right.
I mean, it's going to be worse, but we need to get out of it. It will be Brexit. I think we need to be out of that. It will then become more obvious, all the disadvantages, and maybe after a certain point the weariness will change into, anger maybe, or at least a certain understanding, or an anger that can be turned to good use. Sometimes anger can, admittedly often it can't. But
sorry to have tried to interrupt you. That interim time period can be most challenging. Can I talk a little bit about right after the election?
Yeah.
So I've worked for 4 years with an immigrant refugee rights organization in Massachusetts called the MIRA Coalition, which stands for Mass Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. And it's quite a large statewide group. And we have a number of sister and brother organizations around the country. And all those organizations have been meeting with, and I found this out after the election, had been meeting with Hillary Clinton's campaign and had come up with immigration reform legislation that And it's really challenging to get the most radical immigrant rights groups and the most conservative together, and people were together on this. So the morning after the election was one of just utter disbelief, devastation, and where do we go from here? Whoa. What happened, though, was our phones in our office in Boston started ringing off the hook. We could not handle the calls. Our website, we had 100 new first-time donors in 800 in a matter of 6 months. I think we had like a 600 to 800% increase in our donor giving over a short period of time because people were looking for a way to respond.
Yeah.
And when, even before he got sworn in, he enacted the Muslim ban and turned away people at our airports. People went to the airports. Lawyers who don't even do immigration law were setting up little card tables and volunteering. People were coming from the suburbs with signs, "We welcome you." So we may have been dragged down and hopeless, but they weren't. And there's sort of this old Jewish saying, "If not now, when?" And I just kept saying to people, okay, in a way, some of us politically have been preparing for this for the past 5 decades. Come on. We had Ronald Reagan. What did he do? We had the 2 Bushes. What did they do?
You had Vietnam.
We had Vietnam.
Yeah.
Now we have Trump. We had the housing meltdown and the recession. Before that, I was president of a local labor union back in the 80s. That was Reagan. That was the air traffic controllers. That was media paying no attention, slamming labor unions all the time. Government going against unions all the time. So every decade, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s now, we have always faced an onslaught in one area or another. So you kind of just have to combine.
Oh, that's fantastic. To
Yeah,
hear
you
that.
have to combine your knowledge and your understanding of all of these things, of all the ways that, the powers surrounding us, business, government, whatever, whoever it is, banks, they love when we just sit back.
Yeah.
And when we despair.
Yeah.
And when we don't demonstrate and don't write and don't tweet and don't use Facebook and
Yeah. So that actually, you're describing your own hopeful energy.
Right. Yes.
I bet it takes a lot of effort, though, doesn't it? It takes a lot of effort and time. And
hence 6 weeks here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I really needed it.
Yeah.
And I've had just a phenomenal trip. Yeah,
Oh, it's
all the way around.
it's actually, it's really, I mean, it's great hearing that, everything you've just said, putting it into that perspective over that period of time, isn't it? Because it's long-term stuff.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to say anything about the American politics, but in British politics, it's so short-term. It's like the news cycle is so short. And
it's the same in the U.S.
yeah, and the short-term stuff. And I'm sure, and I don't for a minute mean that applies to all UK politicians. It certainly doesn't. But when you put something into the amount of effort that's needed over, if we go back to Vietnam, that's a 50-year or more, 50-year period. You just have to kind of keep going with it. And in a way, that's what the independence movement has done in Scotland. I mean, 50 years ago, it was fringe stuff, and it was easily kind of laughed at, and now it's the major party in Scotland.
So I wonder, this is an observation of mine from home, and I wonder if it's played out here. I find that my son, who's 29, and his generation and the ones coming up after him, the younger generation, have gone to school with so many people of different ethnicities, different birthplaces, different colors, that he has such a different, he and his friends have such a different perspective. They have such a range of both experiences and of current friends that in some ways, once again, my hope is with his generation and the ones coming after. And as I walk around Glasgow and Edinburgh, and I see so many Asian immigrants, so many immigrants of color, and I hear the Scottish accents of the young people, and I just assume the same thing, that they're not going to let us older people continue in the way, politically that the countries have. I don't know. What the experience is. And that leads me to my concern about immigration and refugee issues in Britain, and how Scotland can continue to be, as it has been, a much more welcoming society that understands that there are some reasons why people leave their home countries, and understands the contributions and the benefits to welcing different
It's really
families.
difficult because there's only so much that can be done. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
Holyrood doesn't have any say in immigration
There's-
rules and regulations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's been some really, sad stories
Yeah.
of late of, people having to leave Scotland. Have set up businesses here. They've been here for a while,
Yeah.
and they've been forced to leave.
Yeah,
And there's virtually nothing that can be done.
yeah.
You know. It's
So
not
you
that
think
good.
it would take independence to be able to?
Yeah, we don't control immigration.
Yeah.
The Scottish government doesn't have control over that. So it's all whatever the UK dictates. And until we're independent, we can't
Yeah.
until we're a normal country that
Yeah.
can set its own
Yeah.
immigration, refugee, whatever,
Yeah.
right? We can't do anything,
Yeah.
really.
So if I come to work on an independence campaign, I have to come on a tourist visa for a few months.
Absolutely. And if you want to stay here, we can always find you
We can always find you a room somewhere, or
a safe house.
I love
Find you a
volunteering.
safe
house.
Don't you worry, you'll be okay.
But I think that point about younger generation, well, younger than me and yourself,
Yeah.
having a much different experience of just being through school. It's a much more diverse society. If I look back to it, when I went to primary school, there was a bit of diversity, but it was just the people who had Polish surnames, because their dads had come over to Scotland during the Second World War, fought in the Polish, probably in the Air Force, stayed on, married, got kids. So there was quite a lot in Fife. There was quite a lot of Polish surnames on the go, but that was about it as regards, diversity. So hopefully that our experience of, like you were mentioning, your son, same goes for my daughter, is going to kind of carry on.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the moment, Holyrood Parliament, Scottish Parliament, has been, saying, look, we need control over, with Brexit, we need control over immigration. It's a different situation up here with regards to spread of different age groups. It's really important that we carry on with immigration come to the country and want to set up different, a different system. I'm not holding my breath. I'm not holding my breath that Westminster's going to agree.
They'll never devolve that, just like they'll never devolve in broadcasting.
Yeah.
Because that's...
Wouldn't that have been a different situation if they devolved broadcasting?
Yeah. So,
but it's a serious problem for us. It is a serious problem for us, and it's also serious. To be fair, it's also serious for England. The number of, especially EU people from the EU, coming to work in the National Health Service has plummeted. Nurses in particular. That's a huge problem for down there, and it happens a bit to Scotland, but not quite so much, because we do have a more welcoming approach. But without the backup, without the legal backup, you can be as welcoming as you like, but you're still going to get the Home Office sending you a letter saying you have to leave.
Yeah, like families having to leave, as I just said, there's nothing we could really do about it. So that's kind of where we are. But the National Health Service, that's another thing. Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson, it's Farage. I remember watching him on the TV, he was talking about the NHS, and he's going, we can be maybe a bit more like America, and he couches things in this softly, encompassing language, and it was like, we'll introduce insurance to help out the NHS. It's death.
Yeah.
It's death.
Oh, yeah.
It'll kill the NHS, right? Once you get down that path. I don't know if you can maybe tell us much about the health service in America. I know it seems to be, there's a lot of people are dying because they can't
Oh yeah.
get...
the stories that we read, and so not only in sort of the mainstream media, but via Facebook and Twitter especially, of people who, it's almost like they're thinking, not that they're thinking nothing, and not that they're accepting it, but they're describing. They have, somebody 35 has a horrible cancer diagnosis, and at some point they have to choose if they can continue with their chemotherapy treatment, because the thousands of dollars per dosage is meant, and the lack of what do you call conditions that you have that you can't, if you want to get on a new health plan. This is the other thing. There's so many choices in the U.S. that you dare not move from one health plan to the other, perhaps to save money or for better coverage, because pre-existing condition.
Oh yeah,
If you have a
conditions,
pre-existing
you've got to
condition,
state them. They
you can
won't
be
take you.
denied or you can be
Yeah.
charged kind of out of pocket.
Yeah.
It's very frightening, and it takes almost a university semester-long course to understand what each health plan will cover and what it won't, and even then you can do all that research. I just got bills before I left that I have to make phone calls about when I get home, just for simple tests and things. So I have bills for just under $400. I was sure my health plan covered. I was very careful. I had to make a choice. I'm now a senior, so we have our Medicare system. No, somehow I'm being charged out of pocket. So it's becoming literally worse by the week and more frightening by the week. You know, we read more and more horror stories. And as you know, I'm sure, Trump and the Republicans are talking about cutting out every vestige of the American health care plan that the Obama administration voted in.
This is the scary thing for the UK is that when it comes to negotiation, who they're going to negotiate with, right? So it's going to have to be the USA, right? So he's talking about standards, etc. But the big plummy thing is the National Health Service. Now we're separate at the moment. We've got our own Scottish Health Service, right? But if you've got to do a deal with the US, right, and the National Health Service is prime meat, right? You could see, death by 1,000 cuts, or, that could disappear.
I have no understanding of why Britain would need to negotiate its health care with another country.
Well,
the only thing I can imagine is pharmaceuticals, which seem to be international, but why anything else?
Well, if the person you're negotiating with says, we're not going to negotiate unless the NHS is on the table.
You've had
the trade agreements.
The trade
and
agreements.
He did say
It comes
that.
down to trade agreements. It's like, okay, right, you want to do a trade with us, right? The National Health Service has to be on the table.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what the U.S. thinks it can do or gain from inveigling itself into another nation's healthcare system. Again, beyond pharmaceuticals.
Dollars. It can gain dollars. Can gain
insurance and
millions.
stuff.
You mean
Dollars.
having these American health insurance companies, the Aetnas, the Blue Cross Blue Shields, come over here and set up shop?
It could be a replica of what's happening
Yeah.
in the US.
I mean, but for a small proportion of Americans, that system over there works exceedingly well. I mean, my daughter worked over in California, San Francisco, Los Angeles. For a while she had, health insurance came with a job. I was a bit concerned before she went over, and we all looked into it, and I thought, wow. And, it's true. I mean, you did anything, you just get it immediately. She didn't have to pay any bills. It was all covered by her employer, because she's a very good employer. And it was a better service than you would have got over here, because you would have had to wait a few months before you could have seen, a consultant and what have you. So for a small number of people, no doubt it's fine, but for the majority of Americans,
and it is a small number.
It isn't. And it would be the same over here. I mean, it already is worse. Now in England, English NHS, a lot of the GP practices are owned by private companies, and I presume they pay, the GPs are paid by them. So that results immediately in profit comes into it in a way that we're not used to thinking about in the NHS. Of course, you want it to be run. You want it to be run efficiently. You want to kind of use money as in the best way possible and not waste it, but so that money can be fed back in, not so that money goes into shareholders' pockets. So it's already kind of eroding that National Health Service, the kind of philosophy of it's already being eroded in the English system. Not so much up here because it is devolved, it's completely separate. The Scottish Government and NHS make their own deals with pay deals and conditions of service deals, and they're better. There was a whole, remember, Kevin, there was a whole set of strikes or protests by junior doctors down in England. That was when Jeremy Hunt was the Secretary of State for Health. That didn't ever happen up here because Scottish Government sat down and worked out a good deal with them. So there's this huge benefit to lose as regards in UK as a whole if that was lost. But it's even more for us to lose in Scotland because we've managed to keep more of how the health service used to be. So it's dreadful to think of, but yeah, it's you know, if you take yourself out of a 500 billion market that the EU represents, so you've got huge bargaining power, massive, more bargaining power than the US has. You take yourself out of that, you're a little country, you know, you're in trouble anyway, and then you sit down with this big country whose latest slogan is America First.
Yep.
You know, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if you feel bullied.
Yeah.
It's this whole thing with Brexit anyway was really down to the Tory party and internal tensions within that over the EU.
Yeah.
So,
and this is once again yet another pivotal week this week.
yeah, exactly. And of course, Scotland voted 62% to stay in, and that highlighted what we were saying during IndieRef, that you know, what gets voted for basically down in England is what gets imposed up here, whether we agree with it or not. So there's not four countries there. It's whatever's dictated by the country with the by far the biggest population. And in this case, we're going to be dragged out of the EU
Now,
because of that.
what I read sounds like there's been a much, that people, obviously, their eyes are open here in Scotland, and they're not at all, they're disgusted by what's happened, and I think most people feel that independence is inevitable. I don't know what that translates into if there were, you know, a referendum within the next year, what that would look like. I wonder what all of you think might be happening.
It's like, it depends what the SNP hierarchy really are thinking in this, because completely, I've got no idea. I've got absolutely no idea what's going to happen. I don't know about you.
Well, I mean, it's true what you say, Sue. You know, when people get asked the question, do you think Scotland's going to be independent? So it's like not a when question. It's just do you think it is? Yeah, there is. A majority have come back. I forget what the figure is, but it's up into the 60s at least. But then it doesn't translate into how would you vote if there was a referendum tomorrow. It doesn't translate into the same amount. So that kind of, at the moment, the kind of how would you vote tomorrow seems to be coming in at about 49% yes, 51% no, which is basically, you can't tell a difference. I mean, that's not a significant difference in any kind of poll. But it does mean that there's a significant number of people who do think that Scotland's going to be independent, but they themselves are not at the point of voting for it. And it's those people that are, a reasonable proportion of them that we have to start persuading.
Right.
Yeah. And I think within, I was saying to you, like I wasn't very active in 2014. I was always going to vote yes when I went to a few meetings, Women for Independence meetings in particular. But I wasn't very active. And then, when was it? 2 years ago when Mrs. May said, now is not the time for another referendum. I thought,
Yeah, right.
I'll not tell you what I thought, because we're broadcasting.
Yeah.
But it wasn't very polite. And at that point, I thought, I need to do something. I just need to kind of get going here. And it seemed to me that...
And look at you now.
I know, look at me now.
Co-hosting.
Co-presenter.
Great.
Co-host. But I thought, okay, for my age group, the over 65s, only about 25% voted yes. So I thought, okay, that if we could make a shift in that, of even just get it up to 30, 35, 40%, that would make a significant difference to the result of a next independence referendum. So I started, looking into how to do that. And actually, the last poll, the last Scottish poll, I've got the figure somewhere, but it's for at least for over, maybe not over 65, but over 55s, it's up to about 35%.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over 65 it's still less than that. But it's it's over 30 now, seems. I've certainly seen figures in some polls for that. So that's a start. We definitely need to get my age group a bit more persuaded, and we don't need to persuade the kind of 16 to 20, 30-year-olds. They're up at about 70% for yes.
Wow.
But they don't all vote.
Yeah,
So
we have
they've
that problem.
got to get out and vote.
Yeah, that's a big thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's try to get
Yeah.
the youngsters out.
And this time, people who are in Scotland, based in Scotland, or who are European citizens, they tended to vote no last time because they were frightened that it would mean us being chucked out of the EU,
Right.
which was never a very likely possibility. But it was a story. It
Yeah.
was part of how the Better Together people presented the dangers.
It's part of Gordon Brown's story, right?
And now they're much more likely to vote yes. So there's reason to be hopeful. And I know people get frustrated with, Kev mentioned SNP, higher echelons.
Yeah.
I know people get frustrated with them, but I just think it's, we just have to get out of this particular hiatus. Brexit's going to happen, and then and then start talking. I mean, if they don't start talking a bit more specifically about how to go about getting a referendum after that, I might start to get a bit disillusioned. But for the moment, I think it's just a bloody hard situation that they're in, and it's probably nothing much that would be the right answer. And in that case, well, you're probably better to hodge your horses, as my granny used to say.
Okay,
That's Scots for be cautious.
Yeah, well, in Americanese, it's hold your horses.
Yeah.
Well, just to let you know, I'm going to stop the live stream, the Independence live stream, right? But we are not going to be moving, are we? We're going to be sitting here,
Yeah.
okay? So I'm going to stop the live stream, and then we'll... So if you want to listen to us, it's best to go to indylive.radio, our website. You'll get us there, okay? So if you want to say goodbye to our people watching the live stream at the moment, we will be back actually, and we will be live
Thank you so
streaming.
much for having me.
Oh,
What a
yeah.
treat
Yeah,
for me.
great having you.
Don't worry,
Thank
we're
you.
doing this magical thing where we shift hats, but we're actually still here. It's just, okay, folks, we'll be back, okay? And we're not going anywhere. We'll be back, but still not going anywhere. Okay, I'll just stop
So we have to keep the
the
headphones
live.
on.
So
right,
we
for the-
just, just keep talking. It's okay. Everything's still the same.
Okay.
the thing I'd love to